are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Here's your host, Michael Storm.
Beautiful day to be alive in the world, wherever you are. Hopefully it's as beautiful in your world as it is in mine. I've let the sun in, and I'm here in my studio, and I have all my tools and my connections and my microphone and mouse and pen and pencil for notes, and I got the cigar. It's lit, and the coffee is cold. That sounds a little weird, doesn't it? Cold coffee. I get hell for it all the time. There's all these hot coffee drinkers. But it's all in place. That's what I'm saying, and it's time for Toward Anarchy. I'm your host, Michael Storm. We do this every Sunday, 1 to 3 p.m. Central Time, right here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. It's amazing. It's a wonderful thing. It's great to be here again, as always, and a pleasure to do this. And I thank you for taking a little time to share your time with me and to hear about the things that I'm into and doing and what I find interesting in the world. It's a weird thing to think that people value your opinion about something. So it's important, I think, that I practice my opinion and that it be directed and well engaged with the current atmosphere, the reality that we live in, at least on some level, to be able to convey my own reality is too easy. I live in this existence. I'm here. I do this thing every single day, and I'm happy, and that's what I'm talking about. I hope it's, whether it's sunny or not in your world, I hope it's as sunny as it is in my world right now, in terms of the way you feel about your life and the way you feel about the future, even regardless of the growing debt bubble and pandemic viruses and all these things that are there to scare you. I think the thing is to be wary of these things, be knowledgeable of these things, and find yourself the tools and the place and the happiness that makes it so you can survive through it all. And I kind of try to do a little bit of that, or at least share that with you. It's a wonderful day for me. Nostalgically, my only son, is 9 years old today. So we have that going on, and we have the birthday party later today at Grandma's house, and all those things to look forward to. But so it's just another example of me every single day doing what I have to do. I might have to go let the puppy in. I didn't realize that it was out there. That's going to happen because there's a very good chance that she will bark from where she's at. I have a new neighbor. I haven't told you about. I haven't talked about my neighbor in a long time. I might have to do that. It would be interesting. Just if you followed along from the beginning, for me to even tell you that I have a new neighbor already should be kind of interesting because I just got a new neighbor, right? And it's the same place. I don't want to go into it right now because I just have so much other stuff to talk about, but the dog just brought that to mind. No, but it's just that's another example of just like the worst thing that's going on in my life. Oh, I got to worry about a new neighbor. That's it, because I try to take a positive approach to everything, and I try to find the best thing that I can about it. And I guess I'll get into this about the voting and everything because it goes right along with it. But let me tell you about how to follow along and to make sure that we do the sort of basics that we have to do every week, because there are some things, and this all ties together as it always does. And it's a good thing that my mind works at least in that way. If it's not everywhere, it at least finds some way to tie it all together. Go to towardanarchy.com. And it's Sunday, February 16th. If you have to go through the archive, just click on the archive button. I fixed this in myself so that I won't catch myself again doing this, to make sure that I don't trip myself up when I'm trying to do something as simple as tell you about how to find the page with the information for the show today, to be able to follow along and to be able to grab a link and to be able to share it through the social media and all the things that I talk about that are so important if we're going to get any kind of message, whatever it is, if you value it, out there and share it with people. You have to do it, and I have to be able to do it, and I have to be able to get it to you clearly and concisely and quickly. You have to be able to understand it, and if I'm stumbling through it, there's no way you can do it. It's hard enough to do it without some fool stuttering through trying to explain you how to do it. So I made it easy on myself, had to correct a bad behavior of my own, but it'll help me improve the overall approach to the show and things that happen while I'm live on the show. TowardAnarchy.com. Click on the archive right there. Sunday, February 16th. If you, it's 2020, so I guess I should throw that in there. February 2020, Sunday, February 16th. Tell you exactly what's happening on the show. If you're going to be listening to the show live today, you click right there on the link. You probably already know this, but if you have to share it with people, I know it's not always easy to find. Everybody's got something different. Everybody has a different device, and everybody has a different browser, and things behave differently. And so we try to make it as simple and as easy as possible for you to get there. You just click on that link and click on the orange, yellow button right there. The little player will pop up, and you should be streaming. And you can do that with RBN anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to be able to listen to the network. But Sunday, 1 to 3 p.m. Central, that's my time. And today, I brought Michael Howell onto the show. Well, he'll be here in about 24 minutes. He's going to call in. And if you remember Michael, he's an author, and he's a friend of mine that I've been getting to know for a few years digitally now, and we've had him on the show. And he's back this time to talk about the Federal Reserve, and we're going to have a long conversation about it because it came up. It comes up all the time. It came up last week in my conversation with Jacob Hornberger. It's something that we need to address and have that longer conversation about because there's some reality and there's some myth and there's some questions and there's things that people don't understand. I think it began the very first show, for the first episode of the new show here, talking about money and the misunderstanding of it. Well, there's a reason that it's misunderstood because it's manipulated, and at the core of it is the Federal Reserve. And there's already been some input from listeners as well as friends of mine about some of the things that we should cover. And it's great. They do all the work. You guys do all the work. It's amazing. I don't have to do anything. I said, but you guys send me memes. You send me links. You email me stuff. It's great. I don't have to do any work. I just sit back and let it come to me. That's what I always loved about the social media is because I could just, it's like, yeah, I like this. I'd like to see about that. And it'll scroll through my page and it'll pop up. And it's funny because I see a lot of people that are supposedly, they claim to be sort of smart and on top of their technology and on top of their understanding of how things work just in general and the way you get them to work. And they're always complaining about how Facebook doesn't show them the information they want or something. And they're always upset about, this is another example of them. They're always upset about how someone on Facebook made them feel. Look what you just made me do. It just happens all the time. Look what you just made me do. You did this. You said that, and so I did this, and I got mad, and I threw a fit, and I posted this, and I tweeted this, and it's amusing, but it's annoying at the same time because it's a really simple core thing. Because it should go along with our philosophy. It should be hand in hand, whether it's any Republican philosophy or voluntarist or libertarian or anarchist or whatever. This should apply on all things. It should be consistent across the board. In this case, if you're using the internet and the social media, things like that, if it makes you frustrated, if it causes you to behave in ways you shouldn't, say things that you otherwise wouldn't to people that you wouldn't. Maybe it was the spoon. Maybe it was the car or the gun all along, right? Maybe those guys have an argument now because isn't it about you and what you do and your responses and the way you react in your response to stimuli? That's the truth of the reality. That's it, right? So it's on you. If you're using the internet and it's frustrating you and it's making you mad, there's something wrong with you because the internet is literally an open window to entire history of reality as we understand it. And as not just they understand it, but we, the people, everyone, around the world. And there's every idea, every notion, every thought. It's all out there. All you have to do is just look for it and find it. So if you can't find joy, peace, excitement, learning, and you can't control yourself when you're using the internet, stop. Take a break and take a look at yourself, because you are the one that's doing it. I got to do this. Hold on for 2 seconds. This is going to just... Get in here! Come on! Quickly! New neighbors. Oh. So check that out. That would happen. That's reality. She slipped back out there. The door was open, and she slipped back out there. And I closed it behind her, not knowing that she had slipped back out. And the new neighbor, is working in the garage. They are car people. Not only are they car people, but they're black people. And I don't think this dog's ever been around black people before. And so she's like really just every time she sees. She would be anyway. She does that to any stranger. But it's kind of noticeably different. They're strange to her. It's an interesting thing to watch, because then you suddenly realize, you know what? I don't have any black friends that have been around. I mean, I know that guy. I know him, and the guy that buys the toys from me, Chuck. And, I can point out them here and there and everywhere, but it's not like they show up at my house regularly. But then again, I think about it. Neither does anyone else. I don't invite anybody over. I'm a homebody. I enjoy my family, and that's how I make my life real easy. I don't overcomplicate it. It's funny watching TV, whether it's reality, so-called reality TV, or whether it's one of these sitcoms or something, because one of the things that I find that is so interesting about all the conflict is that they're constantly just up in each other's business, and they just never let each other alone, and they always have an opinion about what other people are doing and about how other people are living their life, and they're not just concerned about what they're doing and the mark that they're making and the story that they're telling to their loved ones and the people that they care about and they leave behind them when they leave this. You understand what I'm saying? It's a manufactured sort of it's a manufactured problem, of course, for the reality TV and things, and for TV in general and a presentation in general. But it's also a manufactured problem in life, because it's just like this. You want to avoid it? Don't do it. Don't participate in it. That's all you have to do. You don't have to participate in it at all. You don't have to concern yourself with what the other guy is doing. But on that same note, let's talk about my neighbor. Check this out. So I am, okay, I get this new neighbor, right? The old people that live next door, they moved, and the place remained empty for the longest time. And then all of a sudden, new neighbors showed up, and they were very odd. I told you about them. They're just sort of odd people, and the first day left a weird impression on me. They're sort of smoking and blowing their cigarette smoke, and they're adults, in the 50s plus, and it just sort of uncouth attitude and behavior and everything. And so they were kind of weird and never really bothered with them or anything. They seem to be gone for really long periods of time. They'd load up stuff. They'd leave their dogs locked in the garage for periods of time. You could hear them in there. It was obvious that they were fed and everything like that, but they would leave them locked up in the garage. I don't even want to get into the conversation. I can just hear some of the screeching right now. It's just so painful. I can hear it already. No, don't. But okay, so they're just weird people, and they're gone a lot. And then all of a sudden one day they're gone. They're it. They packed up their stuff and they moved. No for sale sign ever goes back up again. And then all of a sudden, just a few days ago, a black family moves in. I don't know if it's a family yet. I haven't had occasion to meet them at all. It's happened all so quickly that they moved in, and dealing with this whole new thing. So I was just talking about my neighbor, but I'm not concerned about what he's doing. I mean, it's in relation to how my dog is behaving all of a sudden. That whole thing that comes with having to get used to the new neighbor. Are they the type that are going to get upset because you don't mow your lawn every 3 days or something like that, and it's not the shortest lawn in the neighborhood? Or, there's always all these things. Are they going to be blaring music and working in the garage all night? Apparently. Yeah. But I don't particularly mind that. I don't even care necessarily. If I don't hear it, it doesn't bother me at all. And even then, I'd probably just turn up my own. I was playing guitar. I'll do something like that, make that happen. I'd turn the amp up nice and loud. Point it out. But no, there's all these things that you could do to sort of make yourself really uncomfortable in your own existence, and you don't have to do it. You just don't have to do it. And it's the same on the internet. It's the same with all of these tools. And it's the reality of our existence. It's that anarchy that we live in. Okay, it's all around us. The fact that there's no control over anything, that things just happen, and that you can influence the world and people around you with the things that you say and you do. But the fact is that we do, and those things happen without regard for a need for any kind of authority. And this conversation comes up every week, and I have to talk about this because we've had these the guests on here about voting, and it's a dishonest conversation. It always is when people attack you about something instead of listen. And you always get this, especially when you take a sort of person like last week or the last 3 weeks, the last 4 weeks. Ronnie was in there. He's not a presidential candidate, but he'd be as good as any of them. No, you take Jacob Hornberger last week, and you put his conversation, our conversation, in front of anarchists, people that are adamant anarchists, as opposed to people who are not necessarily slaves to a label, but actually have a moral value system within themselves set towards letting other people live. You get this conversation constantly from that side about the usefulness of even paying attention to one of these people. And that's the argument that I have to make about bringing them before you, is that we had conversations about important, real issues. We talked about the fraud that are most of the issues that are to deal with government. And they admit that, and they understand that. And it's not about whether or not you are going to vote, or whether you think that voting is a valid thing for people to do. It's because that guy over there does. That guy listening right there, and the new guy listening over there, and the new girl listening over there. And this is what I'm talking about. You have to accept some of these things at face value when they say they are what they are, and then use the tools at your fingertips instead of arguments for dismissing arguments. Don't say things that just dismiss ideas without listening to it. It's different if it's the same argument over and over again. If it was me bringing somebody on to beg you to vote for them, that would be different. But that's not what those conversations were. Look, I'm not a voter. And I don't care if you vote. But then I get this thing about, but 39% of the population, the eligible voting population, didn't vote. And it's people like you not voting that make it so Donald Trump wins the elections, and things would be different if it wasn't for all of you and your non-voting buddies. If you just vote, you could make a difference, and it's complete nonsense. Just on the face, the argument is nonsense. More voters doesn't improve the voting pool. It doesn't improve the number of people that are up for election. It doesn't improve how they got there. It doesn't improve the intelligence of the voting pool if they're taken from the same general population. Statistically, the increase in the number of votes wouldn't change the outcome of the election at all because they're taken from the same population. So they would vote similarly to the rest of the population. So statistically, your vote is a joke in that sense, particularly when you're talking about president. But it's just a thing that's not that simple. Did I miss my break? Was I not listening to my break? I'm sorry. Did you cut me off, or am I still going? Should we go to it? All right. Well, go ahead and push the button and make the music come and go to the break. I apologize. I was on a roll. What are you going to do, man?
Judges, mainstream.
This is Toward Anarchy on RBN with Michael Storm.
My fault, totally my fault. I didn't put my headset back on so I couldn't hear. And what are you going to do if you can't hear the music that's supposed to tell you that it's time to shut up, that it's commercial time? Then you don't know that it's time to shut up. So I have my headphones back on now, and the dog is no longer out roaming. I think we can do this thing now. There's so much. You have to go to towardanarchy.com and click on today's date, go through the archive, or whether it's right there on the front page, Sunday, February 16th. And Michael Howell will be on the show. We'll talk about the Federal Reserve. That's coming up in just a few minutes. He'll join us. His website is up there. That's his Fighting the Tyranny website on WordPress, and then also on Facebook as well. And those are great places to reach out to him. You can find out about his book, and we'll talk to him about some of that stuff as well as the Federal Reserve. And one of the things that we'll talk about, we'll try to get in there. These are really simple ideas. So we won't dwell on them a lot, but that's just simple, basic ways to keep yourself insulated from the Federal Reserve as opposed to being able to sort of slay this giant. And we'll get more into it here in just a few minutes. I got these other couple of links here, though. I have these uppercover. It's one of those things that I have to catch myself doing. I hate that word, got. Oh, it's such a wasted word, and people use it all the time, and it's just ugly. And I don't like to use it, and I catch myself using it occasionally, especially if I'm just rolling and not thinking necessarily. I'm not thinking about how important my speech is, but I want to always be thinking about how important my speech is. So I don't want to say got. CIA literally at the heart of the global encryption. Big story right there that was all over the world here recently about how the CIA controlled this Swiss company that was controlled global encryption processes for a long time in a lot of different places. And it's part and parcel of this whole conversation I've been having here over the weeks and months about particularly Google, because they say that Google is a CIA front. It's there to collect data and watch us and understand us and AI us and all this. And it's supposedly controlled by the CIA or one of their front companies. And it seems that it has been and could be. And all these, anything big like that is going to be centrally controlled. And that's what this article really leads you to believe. And it's about election and all these things. And that you just have to be careful about what you're telling to who and who you're letting control the information that's coming into you, not just what you're putting out there, and making sure that you don't. It's terrible to have to say this, but to say or do the wrong thing in the wrong place, there are consequences for it, for your speech. There always are, but it's insidious when it's internet related and when it's sort of speech related, when it's you could just turn the knob, click on a different website. This whole thing is very nefarious, and it's very scary, and it's bigger than just one place. It's everywhere. I've talked about it before, how all of the centers of communications are the reason that they turn them all digital is so that they can control them all. They can control all of the major communications platforms and all that. It's under the guise of protecting you, of course. It always is. But then the quote, who watches the watchers. We have that same problem. And that's what the whole voting thing is about. And my vote, my non-vote has a clear conscience, but your vote, if you vote, it has consequences. So it better be a well thought out one, if nothing else. And so the worst that I can do is present to people who might potentially vote some alternatives to just going along to get along, to just selecting out of the two major parties, even though they're going to win. But it's about getting that message, and it's about reaching as many people as possible, and about tailoring that message to be as friendly and as open and inviting as possible. I want to get into questioning intellectual property. This keeps coming up, and I will have to do this. There's an article up there that I shared that is from the Principled Libertarian from last year, and it just questions about intellectual property, and that comes up when it comes to like the music I use for the show and some other questions that come up. And I'll try to address that at the end of the show after Michael leaves us. He'll be joining us here in just about 2 minutes, and we'll have this nice long conversation about the Fed and about its history and everything. And then I'll try to come back to that, because I think it's an important thing that we need to talk about. Anarchy, it is not bombs, disorder, or chaos. It is not robbery or murder. It is not a war of each against all. It is not a return to barbarism or the wild state of man. Anarchism is the very opposite of all that. Alexander Berkman said that, and as usual, a retweet, a requote is not an endorsement from me. It's just exactly what it is. It's a face value thing. Like I'm always saying, these labels, these ideas, just take some things at face value and go on. Don't waste the extra energy in trying to analyze it, especially if it's not. I don't want that to sound like I don't want you to investigate and understand the world around you, but it was just that conversation that I was having before the break there, and just the idea that there are some things that you just don't have to know, you don't have to comment on. Oh, yes, this is great, because you know what this means. It means that Michael Howell is coming up next in our conversation about ending the Fed right here on Toward Anarchy. Stick around. I'm not in my normal space. I'm not talking about the studio, really. I just have a sort of setup at the moment. You could probably tell if you saw the video of last week's show. I shot some video of it. It's available at YouTube. If you just go to towardanarchy.com, you scroll down to the bottom of any page, you can click over to the YouTube channel, and my conversation with Jacob Hornberger is up there, and you'll see it's different from my normal background. I'm not in my normal space right now, as I'm working on my studio space. And so everything's a little bit different and a little bit out of place, but it all seems to be functioning well, and it all seems to be going wonderfully great to play with some of these new tools and things that we're doing on the network. And it's all fun and games, but now it's time to talk a little bit seriously about an important issue. And it's an extremely important issue because it's so pervasive. It's everywhere. It controls everything. And that's what I was talking about before when I said that my friends and listeners to the show have sort of done all the homework already for me, because they've brought up some really great points. As soon as I started talking about having this conversation with my guest, Michael Howell, this conversation about the Federal Reserve Bank and about end the Fed and what it all means and how important it really is. So a couple of points were brought up. Tracy brought up a point, and he's a friend and a regular listener to the show, that this is a worldwide problem, that this is not just an American problem, that this is, for lack of any other better term, it's a banking cartel. It's a worldwide banking cartel that has its grip across the financial, which drives the rest of the entire world, and that's the gist of it. But we'll try to narrow it down for a little bit of consider it local, what central bank, whether it's called the Federal Reserve Bank, whether it's actual those banks or whatever it is, they all practice the same sorts of things, and that's the stuff that we'll get into. And then Keisha brought up the fact that there's not really any sort of end to it, and that's sort of depressing, but it won't change the conversation. It makes the conversation more valid, because along the way we will hit on these points that are important about just simple ways to insulate yourself from the manipulations that are out there. And there's a lot of different ways that you could do it. So we won't harp on it, but we'll give you some hints about how to do it. And so it's a real pleasure to have Michael Howell back on the show. He's an author and he's my friend. Michael, thanks for joining me again, man.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, anytime, man. So how you been?
Pretty good. I guess the first thing I need to do is apologize to your audience. I mean, you've had Jacob on last week, you've had Adam Kokesh and John McAfee, and now you got lonely old Michael Howell. So thanks for having me.
Somebody important finally get down to a good show.
Well, I'll do my best.
You know what? I think that I think that you've proven it, and you could talk a little bit about it. I appreciate it if you would, because my listener would like to hear this about, a body of work and the things that you do, and the fact that you've been out there and you understand this. You've been talking about it for a long time, and you write about it, and you have some books. So go ahead and brag about yourself a little bit, and then we'll dive into this conversation about End the Fed. Who is Michael Howell?
Well, what really got me into all of this was my fight was globalism. Globalism really, I latched onto that about, 10, 15 years ago. It seems like forever now, but individualism was very important to me. And I noticed that the push for globalism was not only taking national sovereignty away, but it was taking individual sovereignty away. So that really rubbed me the wrong way. So I started researching globalism, and that led me to the Federal Reserve. And of course, once you get to the Federal Reserve, it opens up the whole can of worms. And it's not just, and I heard you, I've been listening to your show. It's not just the Federal Reserve. It is your Bank of International Settlements. It is your IMF. It is your World Bank and Vatican Bank. But what we're directly affected with here, in America, is the central banks. But it's all one conglomerate. It's all one cartel, so to speak. They piggyback off each other. That led me to do tons and tons of research. I just started getting notebooks. I started taking notes, and I literally ended up with 20-something just notebooks filled with notes. So, what am I going to do with all this? So I wrote a book about it. And it's a 3-volume series. I've got the first volume out, and it's called Anatomy of the Global Agenda. And I have another book coming out. I've been staying in about a month now, for about 4 months. So I don't want to put a time frame on that one. But it gets more into the deep state and the economics that the deep state is using to control us. But the first book I have out is Anatomy of the Global Agenda, Volume 1. Also have a WordPress site. It's fightingthetyranny.wordpress.com. And been slacking on that just because I'm trying to do so much with the books and things that I haven't wrote as many articles as I would like to. But I do have a Facebook brand page, if you want to call it that. It's by the same name, Fighting the Tyranny. And you can also find me on Twitter at PatriotMan23. So a little bit about me is I had a real passion for ending globalism. It was individual sovereignty. I'm not a nationalist by any means, but I noticed that it was coming after individual sovereignty, and we were being like sheep, so to speak. We were being herded into this one rule, one world rule. And, whether you call it New World Order, globalism, or whatever you want to call it, it's basically taking your individual sovereignty, which ties along with anarchy, and what led me down this road eventually. So it's a little bit about me.
No, that's great, because I think that's how most people come about it when they come about it in a sort of honest thing. They're like, oh, well, I'm looking at this, and they find out about this, and it leads to this and this. It's just it just shows that you've done your homework and you've done your research, and you seem to have come to the same general conclusion that everybody else has, at least that knows and understands these things, and that our central bank is a part of the banking cartel. And they do control all the money around the world. They control its values. And that is why it's so important to understand it, and why it's so important to end it, because it is central to everything that drives the economy. And it manipulates it at its core, so it's not honest. By the time it trickles down to us people, we down here on the street, things have been manipulated so badly, and the value of our dollar is so poor that its buying power is just gone. And this is all related to the Federal Reserve. How did the Federal Reserve become a thing in a nation where we weren't supposed to have any central banks?
Well, if you go back in America's history, actually the Federal Reserve is the third central bank. We've had national banks, and a national bank is constitutional as long as Congress has a right to print and control its currency. But we had the first Bank of America, then we had the second Bank of America. Both of them were private banks, just like the Federal Reserve is now. And that's one of the things that they like to do is they like to make it look like a government agency or, a government department rather. And that's how you get the name Federal Reserve or First Bank of America or Second Bank of America. They're no more part of a federal government than Federal Express is. I mean, they're private companies and they have private board members. They're not open to any audit. Even Congress can't look into the books, and I'd like to touch on that later on. But it's just a corrupt thing that it started in 1910. Actually, the Federal Reserve Act passed in 1913, but they had a meeting, and the best book, in my opinion, ever written about the Federal Reserve is Creature of Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, of course.
Right.
And that was one of the things that I really dug into whenever I started looking into the Federal Reserve, along with Ron Paul's In the Fed later on. But it was G. Edward Griffin's book that really. And I reference him in my book in the Federal Reserve chapters. But they met off the coast of Georgia on an island called Jekyll Island in 1910, and it was headed by Senator Aldrich, which, if anyone knows, Senator Aldrich married into the Rothschild family or Rockefeller family. So right there you have your corruption. And it took a while before they got it passed. It took, like I said, 3 years. But one of the things that G. Edward Griffin points out was the purpose of the meeting. And I'm going to read a little bit if you don't mind, but he made several points of the purpose of that meeting, and one of them was how to stop the growing influence of small rival banks and to ensure that control over the nation's financial resources would remain in the hands of the present. I'm talking about in the hands of the private bankers. How to make the money supply more elastic in order to reverse the trend of private capital information and to recapture the industrial loan market. This is going to lead into the fractional reserve lending, where they get to loan out 10 to 1 ratio, or 10 times the deposits. How to pull the meager of all the nation's bank into one large reserve so that at least a few of them could protect themselves from currency and drain the bank runs. And this is where you get into the bubbles, where you start building a bubble, and then they come in and bail it out. So bankers make hand over fist, and then with malinvestments and things like that, the taxpayers come along and bail them out. How to shift the inevitable losses from the owners of the bank to the taxpayers, and there's your inflation. How to convince Congress that the scheme was a measure to protect the public. Now, coming off of the heels of the Great Depression and everything, we were kind of weary about banks to begin with because J.P. Morgan's manipulation of the stock and other things led to the Great Depression, so we wanted to avoid that. So that was Senator Aldrich and the banker scum that met off of Jekyll Island. That was their plan, was to make this new private bank act or come across as it would be in the interest of the people so that we wouldn't have another recession or another Great Depression. But actually, it is what creates all these bubbles. It is what creates the money manipulation and the buying power, as you talked about.
And that, okay, so, all right, it goes back a long time. And there's some myths about it. It was supposed to expire. The charter supposedly supposed to expire in 100 years, but that was just a myth. It's actually an act of Congress, and it would take another act of Congress to do it. But the fact is that we're so far down the road that it really controls everything. So, okay, I wanted to go back to one of the points because I want to help clarify. Now, when our Constitution gives our government the ability to print money, that's different than saying it gives the government the ability to print money and force the rest of us to use it. And so I want to make that clear distinction because there is a constitutional way to fund government without robbing the people. That was the idea behind a constitutional ability for the government to create its own money. The problem here is that we have been fooled over all of this time. The people have been tricked, and you just read it out loud how they clearly had a plan to get this to happen, because this is exactly what happened in those, and that's clear what you were saying there. What they were saying is what directed it. If it happened that long ago and this is where we are, I mean, they're kind of spelling it out for us. So everybody's been steeped in this idea for so long, and it's that idea that they have to use Federal Reserve notes to conduct business out here. So you have like currency laws that have been passed to force people to exchange in the Federal Reserve note, giving that private banking cartel a huge advantage over other methods of payment within the market system.
Right. Well, before the Federal Reserve and whenever Congress had the power to print, we owed ourselves money. So you wouldn't have a $21 trillion debt because we wouldn't allow that to happen through central banking and through when we gave away ownership of our rights of our own currency. That's how you get the bubbles and all that. Used to, we just owed ourselves. The debt was The debt was owned by the American people. Now, who do we owe? We owe China. We owe all these private bankers. So that was key about usurping the Constitution and taking the power to print coin and issue money out of the American people's hands, because it took the debt out of our hands as well. So we no longer owed ourselves. Now we owe, like you said, we owe private bankers. And it's not just central bank, because further up you go, it goes into the IMF and the BIS, which is Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, and so forth. So it's the whole banking cartel. And I want to stress that word cartel because that's what it is. You might as well call them the Gambinos or whatever, whatever mafia you want to, because that's the practice that they use, and that's it. They work just like the mafia through extortion.
Right, and they've been at it for a very, very long time. That's the interesting thing. It wasn't hard for them to come together and have all their minds come together on this notion out on an island. They didn't have to think too hard about it, because the practices of the bank, you mentioned fractional reserve banking, are known practices that have been going on for a long time, and they're just certain methods of producing wealth. And what happens is that's okay when it becomes a private bank, a private business, a private entity investing their wealth in whatever. But when the losses are pushed off on the people and the gains are stuck in private pockets, we have a serious gangster problem, a cartel.
Yeah. And that's another point that he makes in his book talking about the creature from Jekyll Island. There was 8 points that he made that you're supposed to that they wanted to keep hidden from the public. And that was the very first thing was do not call it a cartel, nor even a central bank. That was one of the very key things that they wanted to keep away from the American people. Was they didn't want the term central bank coming out. They wanted to act in the disguise of a national bank, because that ties it back to the Department of Treasury. The way that money comes in. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment on the federal thing again, but you already made the point. So.
Yeah, we're not federal. We don't own our debt. Matter of fact, we don't even own money. If you want to be, we're using Federal Reserve products. We're using IOUs. Right. We don't have a nation's currency. It's not the dollar that we're using. It's the dollar is a product of the Federal Reserve.
Right.
But they wanted to make it look like a government agency. They want to establish regional branches to create the structure, including the appearance of decentralization, which means it wouldn't be dominated by Wall Street banks, which we know that through inflation and usury and other things, that not only are they manipulating the dollar or the value, but they manipulate the stock market as well.
Well, the stock market is just a rich person's gambling grounds, and the higher up the chain of command you get within it, and any business or any banking institution, the more likely you are to have insider information that you can place better bets on. That's the reality of that. And it's a sucker's bet because normal people, you really don't – I mean, man – you don't hear about too many people getting rich off the stock market necessarily. You hear about people who have stocks in a big company who are making money, but I don't know Bob down the street who invested in a company and all of a sudden got rich. I mean, it just doesn't happen all the time. So most people who invest in it, they're not getting rich for sure. The companies continue to get richer and richer. And then through austerity, things get sucked away. This is it. And it's all part of the same group, the IRS. We're getting ready to go into a break, so I don't want to start a new topic line or anything, but just maybe think about some of the other arms of the institution that is the Federal Reserve and how pervasive it is, with its different reaches into things and how it does it. And then I think we should probably talk about some of the basic ways that you can get out of being affected by the Federal Reserve, because it's interesting what is happening with money. Once you understand it, how easy it is to avoid the larger part of the manipulations. So we got to go into a commercial break. My guest is Michael Howell, and we will be right back. We're talking about ending the Fed. Page should say Sunday, February 16th. If not, click on the archive and go to February 2020 on the 16th, and you will find that my guest is Michael Howell, and we're talking about the Federal Reserve Bank and the Fed. And also, scroll down a little bit more down there, and you'll see my guest next week is Luis Fernando Mises. If you know him, he's an activist and an anarchist. If not, you will get to know him next week, as I intend to. And March 1st is a special treat for me. It'll be my friend Jeff Martinez, is a very long-time friend, 30-something years. I'd have to do the math. We'll probably do it on the show. It'll be a fun conversation. We're really good friends, and we keep up all the time. And so this will not be a catch-up conversation, as that is. It'll just be interesting, as it always is, these conversations that I have with my friends from all different walks of life and different places around the world. Just trying to get to know them and what sort of drives them and their passions. And if you're up on the website there and you go to February 16th, Michael Howell's website is up there, and you can see what helps drive him and his passions and what it is that he's doing out there. I didn't share his Twitter with you, but I definitely shared the fightthetyranny.wordpress.com website, as well as Fighting the Tyranny on Facebook, and there's some other information and links up there, as always, on the show, and the archive can be found there. And you have to like, share, follow, subscribe, all of these things, whatever platform it is you're listening to the show on, if it's iTunes or iHeartRadio or Spotify or TuneIn, or if you're catching it on YouTube. I was just talking about that. Wherever it is you're finding us, make sure to like it and share it, and we'll get this information out. Now, this is a short segment here, Michael, and if I sound sort of slow and contemplative, it's because I want to make sure that we cover all the bases and talk about the reality of the Federal Reserve, and because it is a big deal. It's one of the largest scams that's ever been pulled on humanity. That's certain, and that's the control of the money and what money really is, and how value is generated from real money and real wealth.
Well, one of the things you got to keep in mind is they don't want money. They have the printing press, the ink, and everything else. They can print money at will. What they want is control. And same way that a carpenter pulls out a hammer to build something, they're pulling out their money in order to get their ultimate goal, which is control. They want centralized power of everything, food, resources, everything, literally everything. And that's at the heart of globalism. They're using money to divide us and to get their end goal of control. But the main thing that we need to focus on is the control that they're seeking and the streamlining of all the resources. And that's what these wars are for. We're not fighting for freedoms. I mean, if we were fighting for freedoms, then every Federal Reserve building would be on fire. You know, we would have our soldiers stationed outside of Congress right now. I mean, all of this is just, and it's going back to the whole voting thing and why, I can't participate in it either, because it is a sham. You got one side yelling at Democrats, you got the Democrats yelling at Republicans, and, the libertarians are laughing at them, and the anarchists are laughing at all three of us. So, I mean, it's just one big game that they're playing on us.
All right.
And,
hold
they're
right.
right.
We got to go into the top of the hour. We'll be right back.
We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. The poor and the underclass are growing. Racial justice and human rights are non-existent. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. That is their primary method of survival. Keep us asleep, keep us
Hour number 2, it is February 16th. It's another beautiful Sunday right here in the heart of America. This is Toward Anarchy. I'm Michael Storm, and my guest today is Michael Howell, and we're talking about the Federal Reserve. And he said just before we did the break, it's one big scam, and that's what it is. It's a huge scam, and it's been going on for a very long time, and that's why it's so important to have this conversation, even though it's been pointed out that there's very little that you can do about it as far as ending it. The reality, I think, is that we need to have these conversations. That's what will bring it to an end, because the more conversations that people like myself and Michael have, the more people hear about this scam and about how pervasive it is and how it controls everything because of the fact that it's the control over the supply and the value of money. And what happens is Michael said before the break, they're not interested in money. They don't care about money. What they care about is wealth. They want the things that money can get them, which is labor, product, land, gold, real resources, things that can be turned into other things that can be used to control other people, things that can be used to build weapons to control other people, or technologies to control other people, or for them to transcend. This is where it gets off into sort of conspiracy things, and because there's no conspiracy in that sense of the word where the Federal Reserve is concerned, right, Michael? It's a reality.
Yes, it is. And I've always hated that term, because conspiracy by definition just means when two or more conspire to do something.
Yeah.
Right? There's not one person out there doing this. So by definition, it is a conspiracy. Now, that second word, theory, this is where people like you and I really need to preach truth, because we can defeat that second word in that horrible term that was created by the CIA to discredit us, and that is conspiracy theorists. We're not theories. I'm not a scientist. I'm not using theories in a lab for application purposes. I'm telling you actual facts that is leading to our control and ultimately our demise.
Absolutely. Okay, so we brought up that they control money, they control the value of it, they control how much of it is out there. Every aspect of it is completely controlled by the Federal Reserve Bank and its board of banks and members, and they don't answer to Congress, they don't answer to anybody except supposedly the president, if they answer to him at all. I mean, he can appoint somebody like a Bernanke, or who is it now? That tells you how much I pay attention. Who's our money guy now?
Oh, gosh, slipped my mind, too. Oh, my goodness, I can't believe this. Anyway,
I'm right in the middle of looking at something. Yeah, it doesn't matter. They're all interchangeable, because even when they come from a background of understanding the difference between money and currency, things like this, understanding the real value of wealth, even when they come from a background of it, by the time they get there, Greenspan was a perfect example of this. He was an Austrian. He was somebody who understood this. At least he appeared to be in his younger days. By the time he got to head of the Federal Reserve, he was just another statist, just another Keynesian in practice when it comes to economics. So what I was getting at is, let's talk about Powell. Okay,
Jerome
good.
Powell.
Thanks.
God, I'm
right.
so sorry to interrupt you. It just came to me.
No, that's
Sorry,
fine. It just proves the reality of it. It's just like the presidency. Nothing changes. It doesn't matter. You can bicker all you want about left and right, about the names. You can collect a catalog of information about all of the players and characters out on the field, just like you would baseball cards. It's not going to do you a damn bit of difference if you don't get at the heart of the problems, the institutions, and in this case, the Federal Reserve, and their control over money. And caller was asking, we get them, believe it or not, it happens. They really do call. I just don't talk to them. We love you guys. They want to know about the difference between money and currency, and it's all relatively semantic, if you will. I've talked about it before. I have a great article where I'm talking about what Bitcoin is and what is it, is it money or is it currency? And it's up there at towardanarchy.com. If you just click the articles link and scroll down there, it's almost to the bottom. It says, what is Bitcoin, money, currency, or something else? And I go over the difference between money and currency. And the reality is currency can be anything. Currency is whatever anyone will accept from you. And money is things that actually have an intrinsic value. Particularly, they have a store of value. It's pretty straightforward, really. If you put something away and you take it back out of storage, it still has value, and that value is there not because it was a currency going in as a method of exchange necessarily, but it is a physical reality, a thing that can be used for something other than exchange of wealth. That's
Sure.
the difference between money and currency.
Yeah, and using that example, currency should always be backed by money. Example for that is a tally stick should always be backed by gold deposits. So, or a dollar in this instance should always be backed by gold deposits, but it's not. The way that currency or the way that our money enters into the system is the Treasury Department goes to the Federal Reserve and just say we want them to borrow, $50 billion. We write $50 billion worth of bonds and we give it to the Federal Reserve, and then they go and print off $50 billion worth of money or, paper money. So, our money's not backed by anything. And that's a transfer of wealth because we're now giving the Federal Reserve our bonds for currency. It's bonds for cash swaps is what it's called. So,
bonds represent
a huge transfer of wealth. And that's the key thing.
That's the key
wealth
thing.
We are transferring.
And people don't realize it because they don't understand the difference between money and wealth. Maybe that's the conversation that we should have as opposed to money versus currency, because they're fairly interchangeable in that sense. Money versus wealth. There are a lot of people that have a lot of money. The guy down the street in the nice fancy house has a lot of money. He has digits in a bank account somewhere or in a stock or something, but at least a stock would be something that presumably is based on real wealth. And that's the difference of wealth, is that there would be a real tangible thing somewhere underneath it, something that could be converted to something else, whether it's an individual and their labor, and that's where you get my money my word is as good as gold. That's that idea. So if I tell you I'm going to do something, I'll do it, and that's my word. That's my honor. It's as good as gold. There is so many examples of real physical, even a piece of paper that I make this argument in the article that I was just talking about. Even a piece of paper, even the Federal Reserve note theoretically could have been, if it was a blank piece of paper, because you could at least draw something else on it. It would be used, or you could, as the Federal Reserve knows as it is, you could wipe your butt with it.
Sure. It's just as valuable.
In that sense, it's intrinsic. But what I'm talking about is something really that it produces real wealth, and that's why they're not after the money. They're not after the currency per se. They're after the wealth. If the currency is a real thing that will get them more wealth, they will take the currency too. If that wealth that it provides them, whether it's oil or computers or technology or whatever it is, if that will produce them more money, which will produce them more wealth and more property is a big thing, real actual land, because there's water and minerals and all the things that you extract out of the earth. These are currency, and their money and their wealth. And so it can become confusing to separate them by the very simple nature of how you use them. You probably can't exchange wealth directly with somebody, but you can exchange currency or money that represents wealth.
Sure, money creates wealth. I know a lot of people who have money but can't create wealth to save their life.
Right.
So, it's important that people do realize the difference in that as well. I know someone who has some money, but they couldn't produce wealth to save their life. And That's the one thing that they're wanting, because it keeps us as a debt slave and it keeps us using their product. The last thing they want us to do is be individually sovereign. And that's what all this really boils down to, is our individual sovereignty. And they're not only transferring our wealth to them and all that, but when you transfer your individual sovereignty to them, then that is the ultimate goal, because it keeps us in debt slave. It keeps them inflating the currency. And there's a reason that the Federal Reserve funds both sides of every single war. There's a reason that, we have a military-industrial complex. The people used to make their weapons for war and all that. Now we turned it over to a complete industry. Well, who finances that industry? The Federal Reserve. They don't care who wins the war. They care about profits. And with the war comes the power. There's a reason why every single country that we go in and liberate, there's a reason that, first of all, we never give that country a Second Amendment right, so that we never have to come back over there and liberate them. But what does every country that we supposedly liberate end up with? A Rothschild central bank.
Right, and that seems to be the pattern of events. We had some number of years ago, Wesley Clark, the general, come out and say that they were going to attack a number of sovereign nations over a period of years. And then when you start looking at these nations that are on the list, they're the nations that we've attacked, that we've become involved with slowly over time. It was over a longer period of time than he mentioned, but they all have a central bank. They don't have a central bank. They want a central bank in them. They want a central authority, or at least that's part of the claim. And it seems perfectly reasonable, because it's one thing that we witnessed in Iraq. Am I right on this? Correct me if I'm wrong. But isn't one of the first things we did is set up a central bank and start printing currency?
Even before we wrote their constitution, so to speak, their version of their constitution. Even before we started negotiating or writing their constitution, they had a central bank. If you remember, right after the war in Iraq happened, the streets were flooded with worthless currency. And as Americans, yes, you could go buy for like pennies on the dollar, literally. And then that turned out to be a malinvestment, because the money wasn't worth anything. So that bank made money not only on the war, but on the false profits or false investments of it.
I bought 100,000 dinar.
I know a friend who bought a buttload of it too, and
it only cost me like $10 or something.
Yeah, well, that was the plan too. They went in and made that money worthless and sold it basically as souvenirs. But General Wesley Clark talked about 7 nations in 5 years. And if you look at those 7 nations, the only ones, Afghanistan, Iraq was on there. Boom, they got their banks. But the remaining countries on there is like North Korea, Syria. Well, who are we after? Who are the same countries that we're after? China, North Korea, Syria, those same countries. Evil has to have consent. All you have to do is listen and say no to it. But these guys, if you ever, and I don't want to get sidetracked too much here, but
no, it's all right, because it's important.
If you watch the news at all, this is important, because the world's in chaos right now, and people turn on their TVs to all these fake news channels. Press mute. Pick any news station you want to. I don't care. Fox, MSNBC, CNN, they're all the same. When you turn it on, press mute and read the ticker at the bottom. That's your disclosure that they have to give you, because evil has to have consent. You can't force yourself on you. Good can't either. So that's the free will, and I don't want to get into that or whatever. But if you press mute and you read the ticker at the bottom of the screen, that's your actual news. And that's where you find out where soldiers are headed and what banks are doing, and especially about this coronavirus. Don't listen to the dog and pony show, because they're trying to distract you from the news that's being displayed on the bottom of your screen.
Right.
Every radio station I go on, or everywhere I talk at, because I do lectures as well, that's one thing I really want to emphasize to people. Don't get distracted by the blonde bimbo and the handsome man up there doing the dog and pony show back and forth. They're there for a reason. They don't even know they're puppets. All right, I've been in mainstream media. I know what I'm talking about. They don't even realize they're puppets. Press mute and read the ticker at the bottom, and you'll find out where your money's going, where your soldiers are going. You'll find out the real news.
It's funny. I like there's this thing that happens, YouTube videos, they'll come up all the time, and it'll be a compilation of news organizations throughout the nation reporting on a story, and it'll be the same thing. They'll be basically saying exactly the same words, and everybody they're like, ooh, oh my God, is this possible? How does this happen? Well, it's called the Associated Press, and it's called that these people all get their news from the same place. That's why they're parroting the same story. It's not like I've tried to explain this over and over again to people, even when it comes to larger news organizations. They don't necessarily even have somebody on the street for all these stories and things that they're reporting on. And hell, footage or things like that, they often get from stringers, people that are just out there with the camera, and all they do is chase the police and ambulances trying to catch a news story. The idea that you can turn on your television to the nightly news and get your information from it and understand and think that you understand the world around you is just simply ridiculous, because those people don't even understand it. They don't know what they're doing. Some of them do. Mind you, by the time they get to, sort of Anderson Cooper type level and stuff, they know what they're doing. There's no question in my mind that he knows that his information is questionable because he's compromised. His information is controlled, and he knows it.
Well, Anderson Cooper was CIA, and he's a Vanderbilt. He's one of the 13 families. He was groomed from birth.
I guess he's Cooper a bad example, because he's actually the Manchurian Candidate kind of guy as far as the press goes. People believe him, but he really is bred for that position.
Yeah, he's not a Cooper. He's a Vanderbilt. His mom was Gloria Vanderbilt, and he comes from that line of family. He is one of the 13 families, so to speak, along with the Morgans, Rothschilds, and all these. So he's CIA, and he was groomed from a very early birth. Matter of fact, if you type in Anderson Cooper baby pictures and do an image search or whatever, you'll see him and his mom sitting on a bed. His mom's reading him and his sister a book, and right behind them is a picture of Baphomet.
Look, people need to get this serious about their television and the news and the information that they get in that form, that factor. They have to understand that it's a Hollywood production. It all is, and that they are catering to an audience. They are catering to a boss. They are catering to an ideology within their corporation or within their social group, whatever it is. They're making money off of what they present. So they will present what makes them more money. So they're compromised at the source. And so you can't trust the information that's coming from them about money or government or anything else. And so the way that you have to protect yourself is you have to have these real honest conversations. You have to listen to them. If you don't have the ability to get into the conversation yourself and learn and educate yourself about money and about currency and about wealth and what those things really are. Hopefully we kind of chipped the ice on that a little bit and gave you an idea and how to insulate yourself from the manipulations. And it comes down to some really simple habits, and that's mostly just trying to avoid exchanging anything within Federal Reserve currencies, trying not to get yourself into debt, trying not to help me out here, Michael. There's a couple of just simple little things that you can do like that, right?
One of the best ways to avoid the Federal Reserve is practice anarchy. And let me elaborate on that. Use Federal Reserve. It's part of our life, and we can't eliminate 100%. I mean, that's the only thing that is currency, so to speak, or that can be exchanged. So how can we limit it? Well, we can grow our own food. That's anarchy. Practice anarchy. Grow your own foods. Limit the amount of money you spend on food by buying seeds.
Limit your exposure to that system and to everything within it. We got to go to a break, but we'll be right back with Michael Howell on Toward Anarchy. And it is February 16th if you want to follow along. And my guest is Michael Howell. His link is up there, a couple of links to his websites and information about him, and you can follow along with him. What was your Twitter again? PatriotMan23? There you are. Okay, I got you. Button. Oh, okay. Push that button. No, you're there. Go ahead. Try it again.
It's Patriot Man 23 on Twitter, and the Facebook like page is Fighting the Tyranny.
It's been a great conversation. As always, it's going to have to come to an end, and I would hate for us to continue to repeat ourselves. I think that we have scratched the surface, as always, on this conversation. Is there any specific point that we didn't hit about the Federal Reserve that you think that we should know?
Best thing to do is don't believe anything anybody says and go research for yourself. Those who have to be told never believe, and those who have to do the research are never deceived. So go out and learn what the Federal Reserve is. Learn how your economy works. Learn what the difference is in real money and this fictitious Fed notes that we use. Learn what direct and indirect taxes are. Learn that we need to repeal 1913. If you repeal the Act of 1913, then we get rid of income tax, we get rid of the Federal Reserve, and we get rid of the IRS. Before 1913, we didn't have those three, and we were a thriving nation. We had good schools. We had good roads. Learn what actually pays for roads. Roads comes out of the gasoline tax. Learn what pays for new schools. New schools come out of property tax. 100% of every single penny that's paid in income tax goes to the interest of the debt, not the principal. So that's why the debt never gets paid down, is because all we're doing is paying on the interest, and it's your labor, it's your talents, it's you yourself that are paying these bankers interest.
Well, that's part of the big scam, isn't it? With
that
printing money off like this, like all of them do, this fractional reserve banking, is that because it's a debt instrument, literally a debt instrument, you can never print enough of it to cover its own costs. You can never print enough of it to cover the debt that you create.
Well, let me give you an example. And I say this on every show I've done and every lecture I give or anything. And if you heard me on your show the first time, you may have heard this already. But this is how serious it is. Let's just say we said, you know what, we're done with the Federal Reserve. We want to wash our hands of it. All 320 million Americans agree on this. We empty out our bank accounts. We empty out our piggy banks. We get all the coins from the cushions. We go get every single last penny, and we take it to the Federal Reserve doorsteps, and we say, okay, fine, this is all the money in circulation. We're done with you. You know what the Federal Reserve is going to do? They're going to look at us and go, okay, where's my interest at? Keep in mind, the Federal Reserve only accepts Federal Reserve notes. So we can't bring them gold to pay off the interest. We can't bring them nothing else. Well, there's no more money in circulation. We emptied out our piggy banks, our bank accounts. We got all the pennies and nickels and dimes from the cushions. We gave them every single penny in circulation. And they're just going to turn around and say, okay, now you owe us the interest. So whether the debt is $21 trillion or whether it's $1, it's mathematically impossible to pay off. So this is how crony the system is. This is how illegitimate it is and how criminal it is. It can never be paid off, even if the national debt was $1. Because when they loan us money, obviously there's interest attached to it. Well, all we get is the principal. If we turn in all the principal amount, there's no more money to pay off the interest, and they won't accept any other form of payment but their notes. So that's criminal. That's counterfeiting. That's illegal. So that's how serious this economic problem is. Y'all can sit there and put presidential signs in your yards, and you can sit here and keep having this fictitious, phony attitude that the economy's doing great. It's not, okay? Take the debt down to $1. You can't pay it off. There's zero way that you can pay it off, because if the debt was down to $1, then that means there's $1 in circulation. With that dollar would come interest that you couldn't pay off. Now imagine it at $21 trillion. All right? So the tyranny you accept today, the reason that my brand is called Fighting the Tyranny is for this slogan. The tyranny you accept today is the tyranny your children will live in tomorrow. When it's getting worse, it's not getting better. At some point, your children or your grandchildren are going to ask, well, what did you do? What are you going to tell them? Are you going to tell them that you went and you were too busy watching football, or you're too busy doing this, or you're too busy pep rallying for this Manchurian candidate that you know is fictitious? It's the whole system that's criminal, right? It's not the pre-selected candidates, presidential candidates. Get over that. Both of them wouldn't even be running against each other or even considered if they wasn't selected. That's the type of crony system that we live under. So it's very important that we understand what money is, how our money works, and we need to get control of our money back. We need to get control, end usury, and get a hold of inflation. abolish hyperinflation. Learn what money and how the economy actually works. Learn the difference between Austrian economics and Keynesian economics. Like I said, don't believe anything I say. Go out and research it. I can tell you, but you'll never believe. Once you go out and research it, you'll never be deceived. So that
sounds like a great place to leave it. Michael Howell, I appreciate it so much, my friend, my brother. You take care, and we'll be right back on Toward on It. Yeah, anytime, my friend. Finally had it, and I know that it seems funny to abruptly end the conversation like that as we did, but that was a final great point. The last few things that he was saying there, and I just I hate to beleaguer the point and continue to talk about something and sort of beat the dead horse. I think we covered as much of it as we could in that hour and just gave you the idea about how big a fraud it is and how pervasive it is, and just sort of point you in a direction. Studying economics, studying a little bit of money, and it sounds like it may be a little bit hard, but I've talked to you about this before. If you're a new listener to the show, it's not hard. They make it confusing so that you won't pay attention to the very simple concepts that drive economics and that will be guaranteed to produce. This is not an investing strategy or anything like this, but they're guaranteed to produce the same results every time. If you do certain things within an economic system, this is what's going to happen. And it's very easy to learn and figure out those things. And that's why it's such a terrible, horrible thing with the Federal Reserve and with the people that supposedly are our leaders. These things are fairly obvious. So they're either very, very ignorant, which is very likely because many people are, of what these are, or they are participating in a deception, an obvious deception that uses economic theory and practices that purposely enslave the people who are at the bottom of the pyramid. It all comes down to that pyramid. What I was talking about earlier in the show about we're so far down the road when we get the money that it's worthless. But they get all the inside deals, they get the loans, the money from the Federal Reserve, the other banks and branch banks and things like that, get it at its steeper discount, and then they inflate it once they get it, and they get all these bonuses and things that you and I as end users don't get, and the banks don't actually do anything. They literally do nothing because they don't actually create any of the wealth that they're transferring. They just steal real wealth when you can't pay back the currency or the money that they gave you. That's the way the scam works. TowardAnarchy.com. Today's date is Sunday, February 16th. If you're right there on the front page, you'll see next week, Luis Fernando Mises is coming up. That's going to be a great conversation. He's an activist and an anarchist. He's in Anarchapulco right now, as a lot of people are. I guess it's probably wrapping up today, I think was the last day. I don't know. Something like that. They've been at it all week. I don't know. That's all I can say about it. I don't know anything about Anarchapulco. I've never been there. I brought you the best conversation I could with somebody who helped create it. That's sort of in that sense, in the sense that they helped create the name when they were looking for the name, and he's been involved with it and gone. And I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I'd like to participate in it, but I don't think I want to go to Mexico. I've thought about it. I don't know. I'm sure it's really nice in that area and everything. And there was some great deals. I was looking at package prices and thought about it, but I'd rather just stay home with my family. If I couldn't bring them, which I would be able to, they have other commitments and things that they have to deal with that I couldn't take them away on one of my whims. But I think that we might make Anarcho Vegas. I think that we're going to plan for a vacation in July, and we're going to go to Vegas. We haven't been in a number of years, and we really like it. Just as a family, there's so many interesting and fun things to do, and of course, I can gamble and drink a little bit and have some fun. But Yeah, I think that's what we're going to do. I saw something about it the other day and was looking at packages and prices and things, and that's much more doable because I can rent a car and drive the family to Vegas, and we love to drive, and we get to see the sights, and we get to go through Colorado, and we get to stop and visit with family and friends on the way because we can make it a nice long vacation because nobody will have any other commitments. That's the beauty of waiting for that. So yeah, I had to pass on the Anarcho-Poco thing, so I can't really say much about it. But we'll ask Luis Fernando Mises when he comes on the show next week, what he thought of it. I saw he was giving some presentations and talking to some people. Is a interesting fellow. I saw the one picture. It's so telling of it's an anarchist thing to be wearing a suit and tie and then a pair of Nikes or something like that, a beat up old pair of Nikes. It's just it's a funny thing. Just go up there in your pants and your T-shirt if you're going to do that. March 1st is Jeff Martinez. He's a friend of mine, and it'll be just a conversation with a couple of old buddies, longtime buddies, and it'll be an interesting conversation because we don't hold the same political views, we don't hold the same religious views, and so we'll hit on some of those things. But we share a long-time relationship and knowledge of each other and each other's family, and also the people that we know in common. And so we have all of these other things that are much more important to us, our friendship and all of that above a political difference, above a religious difference or anything like that. We don't let those things come between us because we realize that they can't take the place of value of a true, honest friend and someone who loves you and cares for you. And so it's going to be another one of these great conversations like the ones I've had with my brother and my father, although I know those guys considerably less than I know Jeff Martinez. So towardanarchy.com, Sunday, February 16th is the day. A couple of links up there. I wanted to talk about the intellectual property thing because there's just so many other things that we could talk about. But this is one that continues to come up because there's a confusion like there is with the money thing. And there's a confusion about the question of intellectual property. And intellectual property, as I've made this argument before, is a circumstance. It's not a crime per se. There has to be something more than just your idea. There has to be a breach of trust, a breach of contract, a breach of property, a breaking of property, a theft for IP to be theft. So when I was talking about a couple weeks back, and then I apologize that it's so long to get to this conversation, but there's so many other things to talk about. And I thought I'd always been clear on this conversation, but that's what happens when you bring up something in passing and don't take any time to address the issue. And it's where I was talking about the introduction music and then transitional music that I use on the show, and Metallica and different bands, and the argument that's been going on over the years about Napster and exchanging music and things like that. So in the terms of something like Metallica's song that I use, Blackened, at the beginning of the show, is a minuscule part of the show. It is not really even a part of the show. It's just a bed of music that I use because I like the artist. I don't make any profit off of it. At best, Metallica is getting a little bit of exposure to maybe somebody who's never listened to Metallica before, and that's always a potential, especially when you're talking to a presumably conservative, relatively conservative audience as I am. There's that potential that they've not listened to metal music. Sure, they've heard about Metallica, but in that song in particular, and a lot of songs, these are songs that have been part of the public domain in this respect for a long time, and that's that they've been out there in the public, that people have recorded them, they've exchanged them, they shared them, and it has not cost Metallica a dime. Because these people would not have given Metallica a dime for their song in the first place. I won't give Metallica a dime for even a portion of their song. Now, maybe, possibly, if I could give Metallica themselves, the band, if they had a website, if I go to Metallica.com and said, donate to us $1 to be able to use one of our songs and or something like that, I would do that because it would go directly to Metallica and they would get it. But the reality is if you're talking about a big band like Metallica or any of these others, and just name them. If they're popular, famous, name them. The money isn't going in Metallica's pocket when you have a song or when you use a piece of their song like that. It's pennies, minuscule nothingness. A lot of it goes to the corporation. Metallica is one of these bands that has, because this is not an excuse for taking their property. Don't get twisted. Don't even get twisted on that. I will explain the difference in that. I'm just talking about the reality of it and the fact that there's no point in enforcing on people to make them try to pay you for something that they're not going to pay you for anyway, and that you weren't entitled to any money for anyway. Just me listening to your music doesn't entitle me to pay you for listening to your music. Give me an experience if I go and I pay you for a show or something, but I could turn on the radio, I could turn on Spotify, I could turn on all of these places and listen to Metallica for free, and Metallica doesn't make a dime off of it at all. In that sense, and especially when you're talking about sort of older songs and things like that, when it was different. Things are different today, and it's great because what I can do now is I can go out and I can pay an artist directly for music, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm building up a catalog of artists that either are letting me use their music for credit or that I can pay them directly a one-time fee to be able to use their music and use it across for whatever I want to be able to use it for. It's really simple and it's really cheap, and I don't have to jump through any hoops, and I don't have to deal with a record company, and I don't have to deal with this notion that somehow me using a piece of somebody's song is me taking their words. And it's a slippery slope, and it's an interesting thing because I am talking to you. I'm somebody who is using my words, and I'm putting them in an order. And you say you can't own words. That's an argument. Well, you can't own words. You can't own just an arrangement of words. Well, apparently you can. You absolutely can, just simply by using them and making money off of them. That's the way to do it. Toward Anarchy is a good example. I own that term. Sampling. Yeah, I have to talk about that maybe a little bit here as well. I own that phrase, Toward Anarchy. I own those words. Literally, I own that domain. If you type in that word anywhere, you're basically going to end up on one of my pages. It would be hard pressed for you to use that word on the internet, Toward Anarchy, that phrase, just like that, saying Toward Anarchy. So apparently you can own them. I own the domains. I own the Facebook page. I own the Twitter page. Those are mine in the sense that I control it. Certainly the domain is mine. The Facebook page and Twitter, those are questionably mine, but they call them my page, don't they? They say your page on everything that you post, your Twitter feed, your wall. They use the word your, so it's mine. Yeah, I get it. It's somebody else's playground, but I follow a little bit of their rules, and presumably they won't shut me up from their playground. So you can own a phrase, but what I'm talking about is actually it would be, you can do this. It's just such a question of your intent and your own morality. If you just take somebody's piece of music and their words and you use them without crediting them, and particularly if you make money off of them, you're just a dirtbag. But I don't necessarily know that there's always going to be a case. And I tell you why, because there has to be, as I started the conversation with, and this includes sampling and all of this too, is just I'm sampling this music as it were. I'm only taking a portion of it, 30 seconds of it. 30 seconds of my 2-hour show. How much of that do I owe you for that when I don't make a dime on it? I'm not making any money on the music. That's not the way it works. But this idea that you can steal somebody's idea is ridiculous. Once it's spoken out into the public, it is no longer protectable. If it's stored on your hard drive in a notebook or something like that in your home and somebody has to break into it and take it from you, if somebody has to take the physical album, the physical movie, they've stolen it from you. Okay? They took it from you. But if it's out there, if you put it out there, it's a part of the public domain as you can turn to anywhere and hear it. Nobody's stolen it from you. Nobody's taken anything from you after it's already out there. The initial theft, okay, when it comes to this digital stuff, how are you going to figure that out? And why are you going to insist that you wouldn't want the single most efficient, powerful way to deliver a message anywhere in the world throughout the history of mankind has ever been found, and you don't want to convert to digital? You don't want to go digital. You want to fight it. This was the thing about Napster and all that. You want to fight it. You want to fight change, and you don't want to embrace it. You don't want to accept what's coming and change your way of thinking and find a new model. By the time Lars Ulrich was arguing about transferring their songs over the internet, it was already too late for a number of reasons. They were already transferred. They had already been out in the public domain for many, many years and listened to, and he was a corporate stooge. He was nothing but a corporate lackey voice for record companies who had him convinced that they had to fight this new method of distribution instead of embracing it and allowing those artists to go and venture off on their own and become and embrace the technologies, or to keep them under your wing and embrace the technologies and find these new methods of distribution and get the money from people who actually want to pay you for your product. That's the way this whole voluntary thing works. That's my off the cuff, generally speaking anyway, thoughts on intellectual property, with the core of it being that unless there's actual theft, a taking of somebody's property, a breaking of somebody's property, you're probably not stealing from them. You're probably not taking money out of their pocket. Because it's that hard argument, and I don't want to ever get it twisted, because you're free to market and sell your ideas and your music and your art and everything that you do, and make every dime off of it that you can legitimately from people who are willing to pay you for it. And that's the voluntary line, the bottom line. We'll be right back on Toward Anarchy. And if it didn't, I hope that I explained that to you as well as I can, just in thinking about it in those terms. I don't concentrate on it a lot, because it's in my own mind. It's really very clear. It's like the Bitcoin. It's when it gets to especially the digital thing, it becomes. This is why a lot of digital properties work this way, where they're free. That's just it. They're free because they realize that you can't stop something once it gets out on the internet. And so it's going to happen anyway. And so you want to embrace the idea that it's going to go everywhere. The show's an example of it. This network is an example of it. Using the tools that we can to get a message, a piece of art, whatever it is, out there into the public domain free. Take it. Run with it. Let everybody use it. And all we do is say, hey, if you like what you hear, share it, and share something out of your pocket. Share with the network, share with the show. You got to help me monetize the website. The website gets so many hits, and people visit it to come and listen to the show and to check out the links and everything that we're sharing. And it's something that can be easily done. Just throw a few things. I could go with the AdWords and just throw that in the website and collect some money from Google. But what I would rather do is find from my audience, from my friends, from the audience at the network, people, places, businesses, products, ideas that I can present within the website unobtrusively, that people come across and go, hey, wait a minute, I need one of those. And it's a win-win kind of situation. I need me one of those. It costs this amount of money. That company gets some money. They kick some money back to the show. I support the show. And that's to keep the website going is what it is, because one thing I'd like to do is I'd like to purchase a SSL certificate for it. Just as nothing for transactions or anything like that. I won't conduct transactions across the website, and I don't take any of your information or anything like that. But it just provides that next level of server security across the board in general. You're stepping up. It means that somebody else has put their word on the line. They've made a promise to me, and they've made a promise to the users that if they do certain things within that website, that they're relatively secure, that they don't have to worry about malicious code and things like that getting into their computers without them, sort of doing something to make that happen. So it's just another level, and it happens across all of these devices, across all the web browsers and everything. Now it tells you it's not secure, and they want you to do that. They do that because they want you to know that it is secure. People understand that there's an importance in the information that is collected across there. And that's one reason why a lot of stuff can be provided for free across the internet and across the digital realms, because they can sell that usage information. And I want you to know that you're secure when I visit my website. But there's other things. There's a lot of stuff, and there's never enough time. We got to go next week. Luis Fernando Mises. The week after that, my good buddy Jeff Martinez. Until then, take care. It's Toward Anarchy.